Hi there. In this demo, I'll be talking about some ways that you can transfer your sketch to your relief block so that you can then cut it out or assemble it. So the easiest way to get an image on your block, if it's a fairly simple design, is just to draw directly on the block. This is a thin piece of cardboard that I'm planning to use for an additive block where I'll be cutting out the shapes and gluing it onto a second piece of cardboard. If you don't feel real comfortable drawing directly on the block in pencil and then inking it in marker, there are a couple of other ways that you can get the image transferred. So if you have a little bit more detailed image, like this one took me quite a bit of time to draw this sketch out, and to reconstruct it all completely from scratch on the board would be too much work. So another way that you can transfer the image is to use a piece of transfer paper. This red transfer paper is sold by McLean's out of Portland, and I think you can get it other places as well. It's two-sided, which means the red chalk is going to transfer on both sides, so it'll transfer to the back of your sketch, and it will also transfer to whatever surface you're trying to get the image onto. What I would suggest is if you want your image to print this way, remember you would have to put the image face down on the block. So if you've worked on tracing paper, that makes it a little bit simpler. If you didn't use tracing paper, you could make a mirror image using a photocopy machine or scan it and then do a, you flip the image on a vertical axis or horizontal, whichever one mirrors it for you, and then get the image oriented backwards from the way you want it to print, and that's the way that we need to transfer the line work to the block. So in this case, I'm going to sandwich the red tracing paper underneath my sketch, and it's really helpful if you can tape down your sketch so that you can check your progress as you go. I usually will just hinge one edge of the sketch. I wouldn't tape it down on all four sides because then it's really hard to check your progress as you're going. But add a little bit of tape, try to stay away from any critical images, parts of the image that you're going to need to be able to trace over, and then take out any slack in the drawing. And then using a ballpoint pen, I like to use a pen that's a slightly different color than I used when I did the drawing in the first place, so that I can tell which lines I've gone over. And then it's just a matter, oops, I bumped the camera. It's just a matter of kind of tracing over those lines. With a really straight design like this, I probably should be using a ruler as well, but just to kind of give you an idea of how that would work, you would just kind of trace out all those shapes, and as you check your progress, you can see that the lines are transferring really nicely to the block. So you could just continue to draw all your line work, and then once the image is transferred, I recommend that you still go in and don't leave it just a line drawing. It's really hard to know which side of a line drawing needs to be cut away. So this would be this would be a really hard thing to try to create a wood block from if it's only contour lines. It's much better to go ahead and ink in your sketch so you know exactly which areas you need to keep on the block and which areas you need to cut away. So in a relief block, all the areas of the design that you want to print black need to be the parts of the block that do not get cut away. So in my design, I'm going to have to be cutting away all the areas that are white in this design and leaving the areas uncut that are black so that they will pick up the ink as the roller goes across it. A third way that sometimes works, it's not a perfect method always, but if you can take your original drawing and then make a pretty fresh photocopy of it, it needs to be a toner-based photocopy. So inkjet photocopies will not work. It needs to be toner. So you could scan your image and print it on a laser printer, or you could take it to just a regular like Xerox machine and make a toner-based copy of your image. And then you don't need to reverse the photocopy. You're going to print it the way you want the image to look, but then we'll be transferring it face down. So we'll be using 100% acetone. The easiest way to get acetone is just to get nail polish, but it needs to say 100% acetone. So you'll be looking for this on the ingredients. It should say acetone. If it's a non-acetone nail polish, it was not going to work very well at all. The other product that works really well, if you can find it, it's a lot harder to find, is Citrusol. So that is a citrus-based It's like made from the zest of oranges and lemons and things, and somehow that also can dissolve toner and transfer pretty easily. But nail polish tends to be a little bit cheaper and easier to find locally, so if you cannot find Citrusolve, just try to find 100% acetone nail polish remover. You'll also need some Q-tips. You don't want to put this on too heavily. If you saturate the paper with the nail polish remover, all of the toner is just going to bleed all over the place. So the difficult part about this is applying enough toner or enough nail polish remover to soften the toner without completely melting it and dissolving it into a big puddle. So it might take a little bit of practice. You might try it on a scrap piece before you get to your good block and see how that goes. So as I was doing this composition, after I had drawn it and spent a lot of time measuring it and inking it in, I decided I really want a little bit more composition here, and I want to crop out part of the image here. So as I'm transferring the image, I'm going to intentionally kind of reposition it on my block so that I have a little bit of extra area on this side that I can add a little bit more drawing to. So that's why it's a little, it might look a little bit weird the way I'm attaching this. I'm going to actually fold over one of these edges and tape it down so that I can check to see how the transfer process is going. This is just some artist tape I'll use in a couple spots to make a hinge. Okay. And then we also want to make sure that this isn't shifting around. Right now it wants to buckle up a little bit, so I think I might even put a tiny bit of tape on this edge temporarily so that it holds it a little bit more securely on that side, and I'll make a little tab there so that I can get it pulled loose when I need to check my progress. Okay, now we've got, usually what I'll do is I'll kind of think about the design in a series of little 1-inch squares so that I'm not trying to transfer too much of the image at once. If you just want to kind of, either in your mind or literally on the paper, grid off the design into segments and just focus on one section at a time, because the acetone dries really fastly and it will evaporate as you're working if you're not moving fast enough. So I'm going to find a little, in fact maybe I'll just use the lid. You just want a little tiny cup or something to hold the acetone while you're working. And you also want to have a burnishing tool handy. So I'll be using this wooden spoon as my rubbing guide, and it might be a good idea to have a piece of parchment paper or something to use as a buffer, possibly too if you feel like the paper's starting to break down. I forgot to grab that, so I'm going to just try to go without the buffer paper, but that might be one more layer that would be helpful to have. So with the Q-tip, I'm going to saturate it with the acetone and then wring out a little bit of the excess. So you don't want it dripping, and you certainly don't want to pour it directly on the image. So I'm going to just focus on a little bit at a time. I like to work quickly, give it a couple of seconds to soften up a little bit, and then rub firmly over that whole shape. And within a few seconds it actually is going to be drying again, and it shouldn't run beyond that point. So let's just see if we're getting any transfer. Okay, that actually looks pretty good. So pull it nice and snug back into position, and we'll do the next little segment. If you've got a big area that doesn't have much information in it, there's no point in transferring that. Like this square right here, the third one really didn't have any part of the image in there, so I'm just going to skip that square altogether. And we'll kind of just make sure that that transfer is still working. It's not going to be a perfect transfer, but hopefully it'll give you enough information that you don't have to completely redraw the image from scratch. So I'll do a few more squares and then I'll pause the video and finish the rest of it off screen, and then come back and show you how the image turned out. Now here I forgot that I have a little bit of the image under the tape there. That might be a section of the design that doesn't transfer very well. because the acetone can't absorb through that plastic artist tape. So if that's a big deal, I could move that tape and then reapply a little bit of the acetone. It might have seeped under, I just don't know. You can take a peek and see. Okay, that's not bad. Do a few more, maybe this length right here, a little bit more. Try to rub quickly and in several different directions so that you don't get streaks. You should also do this in a well-ventilated area. I can smell the fumes of the acetone. It's probably not a good thing to be breathing in, so if you can open a window or work on your porch when you're doing this part, that's recommended. I was running out of the acetone there on that last square, so we'll see if I had enough to really soften up the toner. If not, you can try it a second time, but you don't want to add so much that it starts to run all over the place. Oh, it's sticking a little bit. Okay, still okay. You might need to trade out your Q-tips every once in a while because they'll start to break down. Okay, I'll do the other squares off camera and I'll come back and we'll go pick it up from there. Alright, so I've done a little bit more rubbing down here and we're going to uncover it here. There's still, it's not a perfect transfer, but I think it's got enough information that I can add in lines that are missing. I'll patch in some of the missing floor tiles here, or the boards on the ground, and kind of clean up the shapes here where it didn't transfer quite perfectly. And then I'm going to be cutting away the areas that I want white. So this particular board is a really thick ply. It's like a mounting board, and it's probably equivalent to an 8-ply piece of mat board. You don't necessarily have to use something this thick, but the thinner boards are going to end up buckling. So if you use something super thin like this, there's a good chance you're either going to cut all the way through the design or it's just going to buckle. So with thin pieces like this, we're going to have you mount them onto another scrap piece of board. Even this is a little bit flimsy. I think it would be better to mount it onto something like the back of a sketchbook, which is a little bit denser. So that would give it more rigidity and less likely to be bending on you as you're trying to print it. So that's the toner transfer method, and then remember you can always just draw directly on your block if you prefer, and the other option is to use the red tracing paper.